Have you ever seen animals? Maybe it's your own pets or animals that you have raised, or just maybe seen on TV how, animals sometimes will, bite each other or headbutt each other or peck at each other or whatever the case may be. They get in these little fights and things sometimes, and sometimes they actually end up injuring each other. Sometimes in these tussles they even end up killing one or the other or each other even. Human Humans in our human nature, human beings have always or have also and always had an issue with that as well. Sometimes, arguments and emotions and tempers leading to physical harm or even murder. So we know in these situations, whether animals, whether human beings, that things can get tense. Words and actions. Of course, maybe it's not physical. Maybe it's not causing physical harm. Maybe it's not physically murdering somebody. But also we see this in relationships where feelings are hurt, where relationships are destroyed by the words and actions, the tempers and emotions of one another. And I've been thinking about this a lot, especially with what Paul says, and because of what Paul says in Galatians chapter 5. And I wanted to share this with you today, and something we all need to think about and take to heart and work on. And it's what Paul says in Galatians chapter 5. And actually, if you start in verse 13, you find that he says, "For you, brethren, have been called to liberty, to freedom. Only do not use your liberty and freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself." So something on Paul's mind and heart, and that he felt he needed to address with the Christians in Galatia, is that they love one another, that they serve one another, that they love each other as themselves. And then he warns, so there's the positive. Here's what you need to do. You need to love and serve one another. But here's what you don't need to do. Here's what you need to be careful of. Verse 15. "But if you bite and devour one another, beware lest you be consumed by one another." He says, if you are biting and devouring one another, what is that? What does he mean by that? That sounds like something animals would do. And it is animal nature. It is the nature of the flesh, even in human beings, of harming one another. But it could be our words, our attitudes, our actions towards one another. And Paul says if we keep on biting and devouring one another, we will be consumed by one another. Relationships will be destroyed. Instead of being built up, instead of loving and serving one another, we will be destroying each other, destroying relationships, destroying what should be love. And then he goes on to talk about walking in the Spirit and the fruit of the Spirit, not in the ways of the flesh. And some of that is he warns against envy and murders, and he warns against jealousies and outbursts of wrath and selfish ambitions and dissensions and contentions and hatred. Those are things of the flesh. He reminds us what is the fruit of the Spirit when he says that we're to have love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. We're not to become conceited or provoking one another or envying one another. So Paul says to love one another, to serve one another, and beware lest you bite and devour one another and be consumed. And that's what we got to be careful of in all of our relationships. If we take this instruction, this encouragement, this admonition here, apply it to all our relationships. What about in our homes? What about in our marriages? Husbands and wives, Sometimes husbands and wives are pretty good at biting and devouring one another with words and attitudes, and frustrations and tempers and emotions can get high. And if we're not careful, we will let those tempers and emotions and words destroy our marriages, destroy the relationship that we should have with our husband or our wife. What about with our children as parents? Parents are to love their children. Children are to love their parents. Parents are to train their children up in the training and admonition of the Lord. Children are to obey and respect and honor their parents. Sometimes parents can get to biting and devouring against their children, and sometimes even children against their parents, and neither one of those is okay. And that's how relationships between parents and children get destroyed. It's through the biting and devouring of each other. What about in the workplace? Maybe in the workplace, you're going to have relationships, you're going to be dealing with people, and we got to be careful lest we have issues there and don't act like we should. Or with our neighbors, or with our friends. I mean, the list goes on and on. With our brethren at church, within the church, with fellow Christians. Sometimes many issues within the church stem from this problem of brethren devouring brethren, brethren biting and fighting and arguing and going after each other. And Paul warns us against that and said, folks, if you bite and devour one another, you're just consuming one another. You are destroying these relationships. What we should be doing as Christians is loving, serving, building one another up. And in all of these relationships as Christians, whether it's in our marriages, with our children, with our neighbors, our co-workers, our friends, our brethren, whatever the case may be, we are to be building these relationships up, making them better, not tearing them down. And so we've got to be careful of this, of biting and devouring one another, and instead learn to love one another as ourselves, to love and to serve one another for God's glory and for what is good for one another. Let's think about this. Think about it today, think about it tomorrow, think about it every day. And maybe if this is something we're struggling with, then repent if we've done or said something we shouldn't have, and pray to God and ask for help with these things. And work on these things. And maybe if we've not slipped up yet with this, let's be ready for when the temptation comes later down the road in any of these relationships where we're tempted to bite and devour one another. Don't. Sometimes we need to keep our thoughts and comments to ourselves. If it's not going to do any good, if it's not going to build somebody up, if all it is going to do is stir up strife, animosity, biting and devouring, then don't even go there. Love one another as God has loved us. God bless.